So in this segment, we're going to be discussing this interesting Sky News kind of poll or panel where they talk about Reform UK. You don't see a ton of this stuff outside of like question time and things like that. And I hope we see more kind of voter panels. But obviously, it's difficult to assemble kind of panels. You have to go through certain procedures to get a good view of it. And also, people lie when they do their applications. But let's have a listen to this.
Well, yesterday we launched our voters panel. There they are, a project with pollsters YouGov, where we get the views of people who voted Conservative in the last election, that's 2019, and we've gone back to them straight away to try and get their verdict on the party that is getting an increased profile in recent months. That's Reform UK. Well, our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is with us. What are they saying about Reform?
Well, it was fascinating yesterday, Sophie, because quite clearly one of the parties that does generate a lot of comment in this group, Tory 2019 voters, is Reform. And one of the things that you hear is when voters talk about both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, there's a slightly indistinct feel. What do they stand for? Who are the leaders about?
It makes sense that some of them would go to Reform, because if you look at what Boris Johnson ran, a right-wing populist campaign. If you look at what Richard Tice is pushing, a right-wing populist campaign. So it makes sense that some of these voters wouldn't transition back to Labour. They would look for more right-wing populism, and that's Richard Tice is pushing it.
But when it comes to Reform, whether they love them or whether they loathe them, there are very clear views about what they stand for, what they mean, where they're going, and even a sort of sense of kind of something bigger there.
I know Reform have pushed their manifesto, and I think a few people have picked it apart, but I don't think they're that clear, apart from wanting lower immigration.
Now, the hope in Conservative headquarters that are extremely worried about Reform draining away the Tory votes, the hope is that if they can tell these often right-leaning voters that a vote for Reform is a vote really to get Keir Starmer in Downing Street, then those voters will start to peel away. So we thought, Sophie, we would put that to the test. We would ask that exact question of our panel.
That's a great question, because in 2015, that was one of the things that helped David Cameron win the election, by saying a vote for Labour is a vote for Alex Salmond and the SNP. Arguing that Labour couldn't win a majority, so they have to go into coalition with the SNP. So this is a really good, an interesting question.
Now, listen here to Kelly from Yorkshire and Alison from Sussex as they talk about exactly that question, and ask yourself, are they going back to the Tories?
Some people might say that the Reform vote is a protest vote, but for me, it isn't. It absolutely isn't. It's a legitimate vote. Zero net immigration is massive, massive, massive for me. So that's...
Why? Do you want the economy to tank? Like, I don't want to be mean here, but this is someone who doesn't understand economics at all.
Really, I would welcome that so much.
If voting Reform means that Labour becomes our next parliament, our next government, then I don't mind that, because I want the Conservatives to get a message that ordinary people like me aren't happy with the way they have run the country, especially in the last 10 years.
See, that's interesting, that, because, you know, what I think she wants is the Conservative Party to be more right-wing. If you look at it under Cameron, under May was a little bit... No, May was pretty much the same. They're very much centre-right, and what these people want, I think, is right-wing populism. That's what they want. They want the attacks on immigration and things like that. And so the Tories haven't offered that a ton, because they keep saying they want to lower immigration, but they never do it, because they understand like the economy needs it. If they wanted to lower immigration, all they have to do is change the points-based system.
I find that what that woman said just then, really interesting. It's not so much about who she wants to vote for, it's about giving the Conservatives a kicking.
Yeah, it's not about a competition between two prime ministers. It's about punishing the people that they don't like. Now, I wouldn't want to give viewers at home the impression that everybody in this panel is about to vote Reform. Not at all. Of the 33 that we launched with, I think 9 were going to vote Labour and 5 were going to vote for...
And these are former Conservative voters
all former Conservative voters. 5.
It's not bad, 9 going to Labour, but 5 going to Reform. I think that's going to worry the Tories quite a lot. Depending on how kind of representative this group is.
We're going to vote for Reform. But what is a real theme is just the strength of feeling, even if some of this lot absolutely loathe Reform. So look at Joshua from Hartsmith.
I really don't like them pulling potentially middle-roaded Conservative MPs towards their way of thinking, and I think we risk being drawn into a more horrible state of politics. It's an unpleasant group of people with unpleasant ways of talking without a feeling that they have an idea of how to make things better. I would never vote for them.
That sounds like he's more a One Nation Tory, kind of centre-right. That's the vibe I get from that geezer.
More than anything else, Sophie, look at the strength of feeling of what Joshua said just then. There's no ambiguity in his mind. The messages from that party have cut through. He has decided he doesn't like it. Others have decided that they do. That great hope of Conservative headquarters that they'll somehow be able to educate people out of voting reform, well, I have a feeling from our voters panel that's going to be very hard.
You got to remember that, if people are unhappy with the Tories saying, well, if you vote for reform, you're going to end up with Labour. I don't think people will care. Some people will care that much. They'll say, well, we hate you. And fair enough, we can't, whatever their views are, they don't want to vote for Labour, but they don't want to vote for you. And that's the problem. And that's the thing where, they talked about previously in the by-elections where people didn't want to turn up. And, there was the person from Matlis was saying, like, you can't argue that because it's like people didn't turn up to your birthday. That's why you didn't get many birthday presents, which is still just a genuinely funny statement that she made. If we look at the polling here, Reform are up around the 14-point mark. I know Phil keeps saying like the Reform UK poll is massively over-exaggerated. I don't know what he's basing that on, considering that YouGov do very good polling. But you can see they're at 14%. I think this is similar to UKIP numbers back in 2015. And even though the Tories got a majority back then, I think that was only because they offered the EU referendum. And so this is the thing that's going to scare the Tories a lot, because they could lose some of their seats, a lot of their seats actually, because people just either don't turn up to vote for them or they vote for reform, which allows Labour to sneak in and take those seats. That's one of the things that we saw with Labour when they lost a lot of the Red Wall. It was just the Brexit Party taking away votes from, I think, potentially Labour and allowing the Tories to, kind of take some seats by very small marginals. This from Richard Tice.
That's the joy of democracy. People will have different views, and I respect what he says. He understands our messages. He's formed his view. But it's interesting hearing the other...
He's talking about the dude from the clip we just watched.
The ladies on the panel there who actually said they understand the messaging, they like it, they're very concerned about what is going on, and that's what we're saying. We're saying, we agree. I think actually everybody agrees. The Tories have broken Britain. Our view is that Labour will bankrupt Britain, and it'll be left to Reform UK to save Britain, and that will be the essence of the debate and the messaging as we head into the...
If this man does his economic policies, zero migration, all this stuff, right, he will crash the economy. He will. The British economy will suffer massively.
The general election, whenever that is, and clearly Margaret and I will fundamentally disagree on the solutions, but what is clear is that the Tories have broken Britain, and people, they understand that they must be punished for what they...
And that's one of the things that certain politicians do really well. What they do is they agree with you that there's a problem, but they'll offer you a different, very wrong, often solution. So it makes them look a lot more reasonable. Because could you imagine a world where you said, no, the Tories are not the problem? You look like an idiot. But if you say, well, the Tories are a problem, and the problem is they're not right-wing enough, that's a very different political message to the Tories aren't the problem. And that's why that kind of messaging, where there is truth in it, is a lot more powerful than just straight propaganda. And so I don't think Tice will be that good. I think the real question mark is Farage. And for some reason, I think Sophie Ridge thinks Farage will be a big player. And I don't know. I don't think he'll come. I've got a feeling he might not come back. He might be on the US speech circuit, to be honest. That's what he wanted to do in 2020. But obviously, the Rona struck.
Now, we don't often lead our programme with PMQs. It's been, frankly, a little bit sleepy recently, but not today. Today, it was fiery and furious, and you really got the sense these were two men, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, who don't like each other very much at all. But really, this was a PMQs about three figures who weren't in the room: Liz Truss, Jeremy Corbyn, and Nigel Farage. They were effectively used as attack lines, terms of abuse, politicians on the extremist fringes. What's interesting, though, is that they're still being talked about. And one of them, fascinated to hear from our voters panel of people who backed the Conservatives in 2019, that the party they feel stands apart from the rest in terms of having a clear message is Reform.
Which, again, I disagree with kind of their takes on it, the people's takes on it. But you know, the argument about Farage doesn't make a ton of sense when Farage has been largely absent, I think, from the Reform Party. It's been Tice who's been pushing it, but even then, I don't think Tice has done that great a job with pushing Reform UK's messaging. He's not been in the media a ton. He's not been able to get virality like Nigel Farage did. I think it's just people are sick of the Tories and are looking for an alternative to annoy them. And I think Reform has fallen into that category. The ones who don't want to vote Labour or Lib Dem are looking at the Reform Party, because again, a poll is just a snapshot into how voters feel on a certain day. That's all this is. So on the day that they were polled, 28/29th, they said they wanted to vote Reform. About 15% of the people said they want to vote Reform. Sorry, not 15, 14%. And that's all this is. So I don't think he'll play as big a role as he did in previous years. I've got a sneaking suspicion he will be on the speech rounds in America.
And I guess in some ways it's actually the same with all of the three mentioned at PMQs, Truss, Corbyn, Farage. They have a clear message. People know what they're about, even if you don't like it. It's harder for Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. They can't just offer easy answers to tricky problems. They need real-life delivery. They need fully costed manifestos.
I mean, that's garbage. Like the idea that people like Richard Tice don't need fully costed manifestos is garbage. The only way they get away with not having those is because the media don't do a good enough job of questioning it. What they should be doing is looking at Tice's manifesto and say, look, you want 0% net migration. How are you going to fill the job vacancies and things like that? And he's going to say unemployment. And then you could talk about the amount of sickness rates in the UK, the amount of people who are checked out of work and things like that. That's what you could be talking about from there and really make him look silly, because his argument is silly. But for whatever reason, the media just don't do that with these kind of right-wing fringe parties. Maybe they don't take them seriously, or maybe they just don't care to do their jobs properly. So the idea that, it's just Labour and the Conservatives, and potentially maybe the SNP, who need fully costed manifestos and pledges, whereas these fringe parties don't, I think that's a wrong take. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. A like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.